Well, hello there. I'm Professor DAG. Did you know that April is National Poetry and Writing Month? Well, now you do. I'm going to read you a story today, a classic. Where is it? Where could it be? Yes, here it is. Chapter 1. It all started. It all started when I first laid my eyes upon a pen. I wondered at it for hours, and hours, and hours. Then out of the corner of my eye I spotted a solitary piece of parchment that shone with beauty. With the pen in one hand and the parchment below me, I began to write, and I wrote for several months, non-stop until it was complete. At the beginning I had a hard time putting words into lines, but letter by letter they began to form, and suddenly multiple strings of letters that turned into sentences that developed into paragraphs and turned into chapters. Within each space between the words I could sense the meaning behind each word as they turned into a life of their own, the sentences that ended and sentences that paused briefly, but then continued on until they came to an end. But amazingly, another sentence would begin, and the journey would continue. I paused momentarily from time to time to take a gander at the pen so gallantly poised in my right hand. It beckoned me, however, to continue writing, and so I let it back down to the thirsty parchment, where it weaved its way towards the right side of the page. The curves and markings it made were a sight to behold, dancing and moving in haste to get to the bottom of the page. It wasn't quite there, but it was almost to the end when I had to turn the page over and start fresh on the brand new unmarked side of the parchment. A period? What is it exactly, I asked myself. Perplexed by the question, my hand seemed to have a life of its own as my mind sought to answer the question. Another question popped into my head. A comma? A comma with a question mark? I was bewildered beyond belief at this point, but I continued nonetheless. I knew I had to get this out on this parchment in front of me, for I could not stop. For if I took too much time contemplating anything, especially questions like what is a period, or a comma, or an even apostrophe, then I would never finish this work that I had dedicated to and was of the utmost importance. I continued to write for several weeks, but eventually I had to take a pause because my hand began to hurt, the kind of hurt that occurs right between the lower thumb knuckle and the wrist, a hurt much like a cramp that comes from writing too much. Whatever it may be called, the mission was not yet complete, and so continued my labor well into the hours, days, and months. The ink seemed to be an abysmal well that continued to spring forth onto the parchment, never ceasing with its strength and veracity, sentence after sentence, paragraph after paragraph, chapter after chapter. But suddenly, out of nowhere, I stopped. I was stunned to my very being. All this time that I had been writing, I had not yet encountered this feeling. I couldn't think of what to write any more. The thoughts ceased, and even though my pen kept writing, I was not thinking, and so the pen took over, and I just stared. After a while I stopped and reread everything that had just been wrote, and thought to myself, not bad. And the paper seemed to enjoy this journey as well, as it welcomed the ink and made way for the ink to fill up its spaces joyfully, without fuss. It laid there and took the incessant jabbings and markings, but after a while I felt bad for the paper and told the pen to ease up. But the paper replied, "It's fine, I like it," and so I let it be. Along the edges of the paper, however, I heard a small whisper that it too would like this experience. So I doodled a little tree with a little shiny sun with a smiley face to keep it company. I thought that I might have written enough at this point and decided that I probably should start to wrap up my writing because, after all, almost a year had passed since I started. But every period that I intended to be the last period somehow didn't seem right. So I decided to keep writing some more. The placements of words began to become withdrawn and despondent and started quarreling with one another. At this point, I had to stop and tell them to stop bickering, or I'd turn this thing around. We were almost finished, so we buckled down and went on as soon as it began to feel right. Every sentence started to slow down and words became easier to write. Then the commas and apostrophes gave up no more fights, and finally, with great enthusiasm, entered the moment we had all been waiting for. The end.